Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Eat Meat and Question Everything. Today, we are joined with Rob Sikes, the Keto Savage. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Rob.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be chatting with you.
Thank you. Yeah, we just get right into it. So, do you want to give everyone just the rundown about you, what you do, how you got into your space?
Yeah. So I started bodybuilding as a junior in high school. I was like 115 pounds. I was scrawny, and I started lifting weights to get bigger and gain more confidence. And I was doing the traditional, bro diets, eating 6, 7 meals a day, lots of carbohydrates, lots of sugars, lots of vegetables. And I just didn't feel very well doing that. I bulked up to 230 pounds, cut down for a competition. My first show, I lost 80 pounds in 12 weeks. And I won the show, but I developed a bunch of disordered eating tendencies afterwards, and that kind of plagued me for several years post show. And then I found kind of keto by accident in 2015, I believe, and hadn't really looked back since. I've been doing keto since 2015. I competed with keto in 2017, won my pro card status then, and I did another prep in 2020. The pandemic kind of canceled that show, and then I'm going to be prepping again this year. So been doing the ketogenic diet for the past almost 8 years now consistently.
And how did you stumble upon keto? Like, what you said accidentally. So,
Yeah.
how'd that happen?
Yeah, so I was doing carbohydrate backloading, which was developed by John Kiefer, and it's basically keto during the day and then a bunch of high glycemic index carbs at night. And that worked really well with my eating disorder at the time because I would eat, keto during the day, and then I would eat a bunch of like donuts and ice cream and brownies at night. And I was able to kind of make it work with that, but that really wasn't the ideal picture of health, probably. So I wound up doing carb backloading minus the carbs. I just started tapering those carbs off, and I noticed that I felt better without the carbs. There wasn't really any, books or podcasts or information about keto at that time. But then I started diving a little deeper, learned about it being used for epileptic children in the 20s. I listened to a podcast with Tim Ferriss and Dom D'Agostino, and pretty much that was my first foray into what is keto. And I just dove deeper and deeper and haven't looked back since.
Okay, my eyes, if you're watching, fell out of my face when you said you lost 80 pounds in 12 weeks.
Yeah, I do not recommend that for anybody. It was not healthy, not sustainable. And that was honestly probably what was the catalyst for a lot of my disordered eating tendencies. That was all before keto. Like I was literally starving myself, lost a lot of muscle too. Definitely wouldn't want that for my worst enemy.
That's wild. But I mean, leave it to men to be able to do that. Like, there's no way that women can lose that quickly, I swear. But that's insane. And yeah, I mean, around that year too, for me, is kind of when I got introduced into keto. Were you that keto then too, Devin? It was like kind of when it wasn't really like
Was it?
popular yet. Like around 2015 is when he said he
Yeah,
started.
yeah. So I had my first son in 2016, and towards the end of that year is probably when I started keto. And this was clean keto because none of the keto treats existed yet. So it was
Yeah.
like very, very effective ketogenic diet. Now I'm curious, um, for yourself, what do you feel? Because I know this is like I love bodybuilding. I appreciate it so much, but the carbs are a huge thing.
Yeah.
Everyone I talk to, I'm very lucky that I don't have this issue with my trainer. Is like, well, you're not eating carbs, and I'm like, well, no, not really. And they're eating the Rice Krispie treats, pre-workout, post-workout. For you personally, do you feel less energetic when you don't have those little carb boosts? Or, I mean, for me, I was eating Rice Krispies at one point to try and, get that pump going. But what did you see? Like, what difference were you seeing and feeling where you're like, yes, this is it. Like, this is the way to do it?
Honestly, for me, what I was like when I started doing keto, that was like the catalyst for me breaking free of those disordered eating tendencies. And for me, that alone was worth it. Like even if the performance was hindered, simply getting my mindset towards food back was worth its weight in gold for me. Lo and behold, my performance did not feel like it was hindered at all. I didn't have any issues getting a pump. I was training at a Gold's Gym at the time, and I was telling people what I was doing, and they were all like, "No, you can't build muscle without carbs. You can't lean out for a competition without carbs." And I'm like, well, shoot, I feel pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and just try it. And I got leaner than I'd ever gotten. I had better pumps than I'd ever gotten. My strength did not decrease at all. So I was pretty much a believer after that prep in 2017 because I really pushed the envelope there to see what my body was capable of. And I was doing all kinds of crazy things with my macros. Like at one point, I was down to 68 grams of protein as a bodybuilder. So people were looking at me like, you can't be doing that. And I was doing it and it was working for me. So not that I recommend 68 grams of protein by any means, but that was an opportunity for me to really kind of stress test things and see what was possible in the complete absence of carbohydrates. And I didn't feel any worse for it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I'm just curious because I know nothing about like bodybuilding and doing all that. I feel like a lot of people, because I do see some people in the space, they're like, no, I need those carbs. I feel better with those carbs. So obviously, it maybe not using like a blanket statement, but do you think like everyone should be doing this? Like, why do they feel better with them? Are they doing something else wrong? Like, I don't know if that makes sense what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, so like from a bodybuilding standpoint, carbohydrates are going to they're going to hold a lot of glycogen in your muscle tissue. So like if you are not fat adapted and you consume a heavy bolus of carbohydrates, you're going to have more muscle glycogen in your storage, both your muscle tissue and your liver, and that's going to create a fuller, more volumized look. However, once you become fat adapted, your body's ability to replenish and preserve muscle glycogen is incredibly improved. So you don't really have to have the carbohydrates in order to maintain that similar glycogen storage level. So for me, yeah, like during the first few weeks, I probably noticed I was probably a little bit flatter. I probably didn't have the pump that I did initially, but then after I adapted over the course of a few months, that was totally subsided and I felt fine. I was able to have those muscle pumps and energy. So it's honestly just a matter of getting that level of deep adaptation. A lot of people don't stay strict enough with the diet for a long enough period of time to truly tap into that level of adaptation.
Okay, that makes sense. So maybe they give it a try and they're like, I don't feel right. I don't look right. It's not for me, but maybe they just didn't try it long enough.
Exactly. Yeah. I always tell people you'll start to notice the benefits from a psychological standpoint, from a mental cognition standpoint, from an energy standpoint with keto within probably the first few weeks. But from like a performance bodybuilding standpoint, it usually is going to take a little bit longer. I try and push people to go strict with it at least 6 months.
Mm.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, because I was gonna say, um, like for your clients, what do all of your clients that come to you, do you put them on a ketogenic diet?
Yeah, I used to work with people with a mixed diet because I was doing a mixed diet, but once I started doing ketogenic diet, I went ultra niche with that. And then I just pretty much made that my area of expertise. So now I don't work with anybody unless they're wanting to do, my protocol via a ketogenic prep.
Okay, so someone comes to you and they're like, how long out before the show do they usually come to you?
So I always tell people try and budget at least 4 to 6 months for a bodybuilding show. It kind of depends on, what your level of conditioning is at the onset. A lot of people, like a lot of the magazines, say do a 12-week cut. And there's all the popular summer shredding, 30-day, 60-day, 90-day cycles. But if you diet slowly, especially as a natural athlete, you're going to preserve a lot more lean tissue because you're not going to have to diet near as aggressively. You can continue to lift heavy. You don't have to taper your calories near as drastically. And anything you can do to preserve lean tissue is going to be key because when you're doing a prep, you don't want to just simply lose body fat. You want to lose body fat while simultaneously preserving as much lean mass as possible. And if you do that over a 4 to 6 month span as opposed to a 12-week span, you're going to be able to do that much more efficiently.
Right. So when someone comes to you, they're 6 months out. Obviously calories matter in this space very much so. Because I'm figuring out what macronutrient profile works for me right now. I'm really playing with my boundaries and playing with my macros. What do you like? What are their macros? What are their calories? And I know this is a very general question because everybody has a different body type. So like everyone's different in weight and stuff. But can you just give us the most general approach that you can give us to what
Yeah.
you're, as far as what workouts you're putting them on, general, and their macros and things like that?
So if they're wanting to do a prep, or honestly, just if they're wanting to lose body fats, I want to make sure they're eating enough calories at the onset. Like a lot of people come to me and they're like, "Hey, I want to build muscle and lose fat." That's what everybody wants. That's what they say. And they say, "Oh, okay, I've been eating 900 calories for the past several years of my life. What do I need to do now?" And if you're eating that little, we have to reverse diet you, kind of increase your metabolic rate, start increasing calories. And I see this, like, that's probably the biggest misunderstanding within the space. I see a lot of people just have this chronic dieting mentality, and nobody really talks about the reverse of that, the benefits that come from eating more food. So I've really been trying to teach people about those benefits. But if they have been eating ample calories for quite some time, then we can healthfully go into a prep as long as their hormone health and metabolic rate and everything's, in check. For most females, typically they're starting at around 22, 23, 2400 calories. Most of my male clients are 28 to 3400 calories, somewhere in there. And then I'll typically start them at about an 80% fat ratio, so a very high fat ratio, lower protein at the onset. But then, like, I'll say that, and people just like get stuck there, like, oh, low protein, high fat. But what they fail to realize that I'm not keeping people at that intake for very long. Like, I'm changing macros every single week. So I start increasing their protein while simultaneously dropping their fat throughout the first, month or two, oftentimes. And what that's designed to do is increase their level of fat metabolism at the onset with that high fat ratio. And then I can titrate their protein up gradually to figure out what their unique protein threshold is. For some people, like for me right now, I'm eating 225 grams of protein a day. That's not low protein by anybody's standards. So it really just depends on the individual, but I'll typically start them at that higher fat ratio and titrate the protein up and the fat down until I figure out what that threshold is.
This is so, because this is what I'm going through right now. When I started, because we're both strict carnivore for the most part. Courtney's a little bit more strict than me. I had never counted my macros until I started working with my trainer. I lost like 30 pounds. And then he was like, well, I need to just gauge how much you're eating so we can really like play around with your macros. And I thought like, oh, I'm eating 2000 calories a day for sure. I was eating about 1200 and my
Yeah.
protein was at like 90 grams a day. And so I was like, oh, like I'm not going to be able to achieve what I want to achieve. And he's like, you have to be eating around 2000 to 2100 calories a day. I lost 8 pounds in like 4 weeks just from upping my calories that much. And I couldn't barely even reach the 2100 calories. And then, getting that protein up to like 130 grams. And I just kept losing weight too. And I was like, oh, this is so wonderful. So when you say that, I'm like, it's such a mentality that women especially like are essentially like we pretty much starve ourselves our entire lives and we don't even know. And I can attest that when you start eating more, sometimes you drop weight pretty easily because your body is just needing that nourishment. So
Yeah, and a lot of it's just stressors on the body. Like chronically under eating is an incredible stress on the body. It's going to downregulate your metabolic rate. It's going to downregulate your hormone health. Lots of negative implications that come with that. A lot of people, they'll start eating more and they'll actually notice that their appetite will increase, which is totally counterintuitive because they're eating more. But that's just an indicator that their metabolic rate's revving up to kind of correspond with that increase in overall intake. And there's definitely a strategy to it. Like if you just keep eating more and more, and definitely like you will start putting on unnecessary body fat. So there's a point of diminishing returns for sure, but just simply being cognizant of what your actual intake is, and then having some clarity towards that is super enlightening. And a lot of people have no idea because they don't track, they've never tracked, they're opposed to tracking even sporadically to kind of get a spot check on things. And a lot of people don't even know what macronutrients are. So like the general public, there's just a lot of ignorance out there, and it's unfortunate because if you're not eating the right things or enough of the right things, your health is certainly going to be in decline.
yeah, I was really against counting macros because I had been keto for so long and I was obsessed with counting my carbs and that's all I ever looked at. So then when I started carnivore, I was like, no, I'm not tracking anything. Like I've over tracked for 4 years. I'm exhausted of it. And then I realized there's like a time and a place where it's very appropriate to track. And I do think that someone, even if their goal isn't to build muscle or whatever, there's a time and a place where I think it's like necessary for even just the average person who might just be losing weight to track because it really is super, super beneficial.
Yeah.
No matter what to know, because I know when I started tracking, I was like, oh my God, I'm only eating 1200 calories a day. I'm only eating 1300. I would have thought that, my ribeye was making me eat 2000 calories a day. And I just was not there.
Yeah, like my mom, for instance, she just had a hip surgery and she's been losing weight like crazy, and she's losing a lot of muscle, and I obviously love my mom, want to take care of her, but she's not going to be doing a bodybuilding show anytime soon. But she's talking about how much food she's eating, how she's been doing keto for a while because of me, and she's eating plenty of protein. And then I'm okay, just run through a typical day for me. So she rattled off, what she's been eating that day. And I'm like, okay, you're at 50 grams of protein tops. Like you got to eat more protein. People just don't know, and they wouldn't know unless they track for, not necessarily you have to do it every single day of your life, but I mean, just sporadically to kind of get a pulse on things is super, super informative.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And especially if someone's coming from, well, two ways. If you're coming from a place of maybe you've been like a binge eater or overeating, it's nice to just get like an idea of a visual of what you should be eating. Or if you're coming from a place of restriction, it almost like gives you the permission, if you will, to eat that. Like you can see what it looks like and be like, okay, like I don't need to be afraid to eat this much food. Like this isn't going to be bad for me. It's not going to make me fat. So it could give, at least from my experience on my food issues, like give someone a little bit of comfort knowing that you're allowed to eat all this and you should be.
Yeah, and I feel like when it comes to tracking, a lot of people have a negative association with it because, like, I totally get it. Nobody wants to be a slave to a macro tracker, looking at your phone all day long trying to make the numbers work. And I think a lot of that comes because people eat things and then they track retroactively. So they'll just eat whatever's in front of them. Then they'll plug in those foods. Then they have to figure out what else they can eat to, hit their goal targets for the day, which just becomes exhausting in and of itself. So whenever I'm tracking my macros, I just have it, set up in advance. I meal prep my foods, which is super simple with, keto carnivore. I'm eating like once or twice a day and it's all meat for the most part. So it's not like a big daunting thing to prep my foods in advance. But since I know what I'm going to consume at the onset of the day, I don't have to spend mental bandwidth, going over my macro tracker day in, day out, trying to figure out what to make the numbers work because I already know they're going to work.
Yeah, definitely. I have a question real quick on people that like if they realize they've been like severely under eating, like say like 900, like you said, and they need to be up to 2000. Do you just make that switch overnight, or do you suggest they like gradually up their calories for a little bit?
I've had several clients go through a reverse diet from a non bodybuilding background, just simply from chronic under eating. And I tend to see better success with a gradual increase, mostly from a psychological standpoint. Like if they were to make that shift drastically, they would put on more body fat and they would upregulate their metabolic rate sooner. But for them, it's a hard pill to swallow to need to increase calories and embrace a little bit of body fat gain at the first place. So if you do that more gradually, you're going to likely minimize what body fat you do gain. So that typically is a little easier pill to swallow if they do so gradually week to week.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now at peak, let's just say the last couple weeks of prep. What
Wait,
are
can I
the
interrupt though, really quick on that? Can you guys or you tell us like what's prep, what's peak? When are you doing where they're like carb loading? Like when are all these time frames for us people that don't understand the words that are coming out of your mouth?
Well, it sounds like Devin's got it figured out. I mean,
Yeah, Devin does.
I no, I'm telling you, we were sitting in the waiting room and I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited to talk. Cause I just like this has been my for the past like 5 months, I've just been like just eating up muscle building and really working hard to like, see how I can get my physique to where I want it to be. So I'm just, yeah, go into it because you're the expert, not me.
Yeah, so a lot of prep protocols involve honestly keeping protein very high throughout. You don't see a lot of coaches modulating protein intake, so they'll have that high throughout the entirety of the prep. You'll see them start with higher carbohydrates, then taper carbohydrates based off of what someone's trying to be aggressive wise with the caloric restriction. Then you'll oftentimes see dietary fat kept relatively low or a gradual decline throughout the entirety of prep. I've seen competitors literally remove fish oil pills from their diet the week of a competition to take out that last little bit of dietary fat. Now, what they won't tell you is that their libido is in the two. I mean, like nothing works when you're taking that little dietary fat intake and you're training as hard as these bodybuilders are training. So I never go that low in dietary fat. I think the last prep I was in, my fat was still up to like 140, 150 grams a day. So pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they'll oftentimes do during peak week is they'll start reducing the intensity of their training so that their muscle glycogen can replenish, which I do recommend. But then they'll also have like these crazy water cut and load cycles, oftentimes accompanied by sodium cut and load cycles, oftentimes accompanied by crazy carb loads. So they'll do, some people will front load the carbohydrates early in the week. Some people will backload the carbohydrates later in the week leading up to a show. Lots of different, protocols out there as far as to how best optimize peak week. What
Well,
I typically
sorry. When's peak week? Like a week out from your show?
Yeah, my apologies. So peak week is
Okay.
the week of the show. So typically shows take place on a Saturday. So peak week would technically be that first Sunday or Monday, depending on whenever you start your week. I've always been the Monday starts the week kind of guy. But some calendars have it start on Sunday. So, but yeah, the peak week is the week of the show, basically. So everything starts to get manipulated that beginning of the week with regards to training, diet, nutrition, sodium, all that stuff, cardio. So what I'll typically do is I'll keep as much constant as possible, because when you're in a peak week, when you're in a prep, the fewer variables you can subject your body to, the better, the less likely you're going to have some adverse response to it. A lot of times people will do all these crazy manipulations right there at the end, expecting some miraculous change, and they look worse off for it. So if you're looking great and dialed in going into peak week, you're likely going to look great and dialed in on show day, as long as you don't screw things up royally. And a lot of people too, they're just ignorant as to what kind of miraculous things are going to happen during peak week in the first place. Like a lot of times people are way overweight going into a peak week, and they just think that they're holding a little bit of excess water, and they're going to do some manipulating, and that water is going to shed, and they're going to have like this Greek god figure underneath there. Oftentimes not the way it works. Like if you're not in conditioning shape during peak week, then you're just not going to look that great on stage. So being in conditions first and foremost. Now, when it comes to manipulations, I'll typically do my last heavy training day on Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday, because you don't want to be training super hard and heavy in the day or two prior to a show, because that acute, stress of training is going to cause some water retention in the muscle tissue, especially like if you're doing heavy squats or something the day before the show. You can have more fluid retention in your legs, and you're going to wash out some definition. So I'll typically start tapering the intensity of my workouts to the point where the Thursday and Friday leading up to the Saturday show, I'm just doing like a light circuit body weight style movements, nothing crazy, just enough to get some blood flowing, keep the nutrition coursing through the body, but not so much so as to be sore the next day. And then as far as nutrition goes, I pretty much have my macros such that I'm doing the ketogenic macros throughout the entirety of the week, and then the day before the show. Sometimes I'll do 2 days before the show, depending on what I've trialed with the client. I'll have a bolus of calories from both fat and protein, and then a pretty aggressive increase in total sodium, usually about 2,000 milligrams above baseline for sodium. So most of my clients are operating between 4,000 to 6,000 milligrams of sodium a day. I might bump them up to, 7 or 8 milligrams, 7 or 8,000 milligrams of sodium during that peak week or during that refeed. And what that does is it takes any of the subcutaneous fluid, and then it forces that into the muscle tissue, so that your skin appears thinner and your muscles appear fuller, and you just bring a better look on show day. And when you manipulate your electrolytes, you've got about 24 to 48 hours for those manipulations to, stay solid and hold. After that, your body equalizes and returns back to an electrolyte equilibrium, so that finesse goes back to normal. But you've got like a 24 to 48-hour window to kind of showcase and peak, which is why it's called peaking. Basically, you're trying to bring a specific look to the show day itself, a look that you cannot sustain indefinitely, but is optimized for that moment in time.
Wow. That, like, I'm stressed out just hearing all that. Like, that seems like a lot and a lot of tweaking and figuring out. Okay. Sorry, Devin. I just wanted to follow along with what you were asking, and I didn't know all the timeline
No,
of
no,
everything.
no. I like get excited. I forget that like a lot of people don't know anything about, bodybuilding.
Yeah.
I'm curious, maybe you could talk about in general for female, how low would you even consider bringing calories in down to for a peak week? And during, at what phase of training do you really amp up the cardio?
All right, so I'm actually curious to ask you a question in lieu of that question. So you've talked with people that are competing, surely.
Right.
How low have you heard some of their coaches take them?
So in that last phase, 900 is about the lowest I've heard, but that's like for a very, very short amount of time. And then I've heard people amp up their cardio for about 45 minutes to an hour.
So I never really have my clients doing more than about 20 minutes of cardio at a time. So nothing drastic on the cardio. And I'll gradually increase cardio, pretty early on in the prep, but it might be starting at something super trivial, like 1 day a week for 10 minutes on the Stairmaster at level 6. So, I mean, like just minuscule amounts of cardio. And I'll just titrate that up gradually over the course of the prep. As far as calorie intake goes, it's going to be highly individualized, but I typically have a floor in which I don't take my clients below about 1,300, and that's only for like a week. Now, I've got some female clients, like if they're, 4'9", and they're just super small, short people, I might take them as low as 1,200. But that 1,200 and 1,300 is in the context of that weekly or bi-weekly, weekly or multi-weekly ketocaloric refeed. So when you factor that refeed into the mix, their average intake for the week is actually higher than that. So I don't ever really have my clients at a continual intake of 1,200 at all.
Which is low, like 1,200 is low. Yeah, I've heard like 900, I think is like the lowest I've seen or heard of.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah.
I wouldn't consider those to like if I would never hire those trainers if I'm being transparent. Like those aren't the
Yeah.
people I'm like, yeah, I'd like to work with. I would never. Yeah.
I tell people, and maybe this is just me being bold, but I tell people, like, if their coach is telling them to go under 1,000 calories, to just fire their coach, because they probably don't have their health, the best health interest in mind. It's just not necessary. Like, if you're doing things right and you're being proactive instead of reactive, you shouldn't have to diet that low. And when I have my clients at 12, 13, 1,400 calories, they're only there for like a week. And it is in the context, like I said, of having these refeed meals. So they're getting a massive bolus of protein and fat. I mean, they're getting everything in check, so they're not really having any adverse hormonal responses or anything like that. And I'm never dehydrating my clients either. A lot of coaches will dehydrate their clients to try and dispel any excess water, but that's oftentimes just a total mishap. I mean, if you're trying to dehydrate yourself, like, most of the muscle tissue is, like, from a volume standpoint, is fluid. So if you're dehydrated, you're simply not going to look great on stage. You want as much fluid in your body as possible. You just want it all in the right spots. If it's not in the right spots, you're going to look flat or soft. If it's in the right spots and your fluid levels are proportioned, appropriately, and your electrolytes are in check, then you're going to look great.
Wow, I didn't realize like so much goes into this. Like you think of bodybuilding, like, oh, they're just working out, and then okay, the morning of you show up and you like lube your body up and you're tan. Like there's like a whole like science to it. That's pretty insane. So like the day of a show, are they drinking water? Are they eating? Like, or do you just go out fasted? What's that like?
A lot of people are still not drinking. Actually, last time I competed, there was a guy that was on stage. This is like so sad to me. You spend months in preparation, and then he was cramping so bad on stage. He had to literally just walk off stage. He couldn't even compete because he was cramping so bad. And like, it was visible, like his chest would seize up. He couldn't compete. He couldn't hit the poses. There's been people that have passed out on stage because they're dehydrated. They're just simply not healthy. People's hearts have stopped. Like, it's not good if you do things incorrectly. And if you're just simply hydrated and eating proper nutrition, you can bypass all those adverse effects. So what I'll typically do is I will have like a relatively small meal in the morning. I'll have like a fatty coffee or something like that, some source of calories. I have like a small meal, like bacon, a couple pieces of egg, something simple. And then, depending on when the show starts, which normally there's a morning show and an evening show. Morning shows oftentimes start around 9, 10, 11. I'm stepping on stage 10, 11, 12. And then the evening show for finals for the awards, that's 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there. I'll typically have that small breakfast meal, and then I'll oftentimes have like a quarter of a keto brick every 45 minutes to an hour and a half. And I'll have those basically as a way to have a small, dense, calorically dense, high fat form of nutrition with some added sodium. That's going to allow me to continue to fill out, but not feel bloated or anything like that. Like, you don't want anything that's going to cause a lot of fluid retention in your gut. Like, you don't want to eat a bunch of vegetables the night before the day of the show. That's going to cause some fluid retention within the intestines. You don't want anything that's going to cause any GI distress. A lot of competitors will be taking in rice cakes covered in peanut butter and honey backstage. My keto brick is basically like a alternative to that for a ketogenic approach.
I want to talk about the keto brick. That was going to be, I told Courtney we have to talk about that, but I am curious. I'm assuming with, working with, when you're working with someone, there is some sort of meal plan. What are your favorite foods to recommend? What do you like to eat? Because I am always curious to people. Like, I love seeing what Natalie eats. Like, I'm always like looking at her, what she eats in a day. Cause I'm like, wow, like, you're doing the thing and you're looking the look. So like, what does she eat? And I love to hear like what trainers recommend. So
Yeah, so I like keeping things super simple. Like, ground beef and eggs is pretty much the base of my nutrition. And then, depending on my macros, I'll, titrate up the eggs, titrate up the ground beef, or down. I'll add some fat sources, like olive oil or like a animal saturated fat, duck fat, something of that nature. But pretty much ground beef and eggs is the base. And then I'll just adjust from there as needed. I do eat a keto brick every single day. I'll have sardines, can of sardines pretty much every single day, or oyster, something like that. And then I'll have some salad, some vegetation when I want to, but I don't really lean too much on vegetation at all. I mean, I don't claim to be hardcore carnivore because I do have some things that are not within the carnivore spectrum, but truth be told, I'm probably like 99% carnivore.
You're like animal based. You're
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
yeah, because that's like me. I was really strict carnivore, but now I'm kind of playing around with like what can I mess around with, but 98% of my food is all animal based. So
Yeah.
what is your feelings on supplementation though? Like what about creatine? What about protein? Like what kind of protein?
Honestly, my supplementation is minimal. Like I supplement with creatine, and that's just a super simple creatine monohydrate, 5 grams a day of that to keep the muscle saturated. That's all you need. That's all anybody needs. There's no need to do a loading phase with it. Creatine's incredibly cheap. There's a lot of research studies coming out now about its benefits from a neurological standpoint. So everybody should be taking creatine. It's like the most research supplement. It's totally safe. I don't really use protein supplements or anything because I get enough protein from the foods that I'm eating. And that's pretty much it. Electrolytes, if you want to count that as a supplement, I'll have electrolytes, but that's pretty much the extent of my supplementation. Pretty minimal.
Do you drink salt for electrolytes or like what do you take for electrolytes?
So I normally use either Redmond Relight. Well, I salt on my foods, first of all. So I'll use just salt on the foods. I'll use Redmond Relight. There's like 3 electrolyte blends that I use. Redmond Relight has the best ratio, I believe. It's 2-to-1 sodium to potassium, so I like that. The LMNT brand is really popular, and honestly, I think it tastes the best, but I don't think it's the best quality ingredients. And then I use Mike Mutzel's Myoscience brand. It actually has taurine and creatine in the electrolyte. And if I have a whole bunch of separate supplements, I would never remember to take them all. So the fact that he's got the creatine in the electrolyte just simply makes that easy.
Yeah, I use Redmond's. And then okay, like a lot of people, I take creatine. But there's like some people who tell you to take creatine before a workout, and there's people who tell you to take creatine after a workout. And then there's people who are like literally just get your creatine within like a few hours of your workout. What do you recommend for that?
And honestly, the timing of it doesn't matter. So like the thing
Okay.
about creatine is that you have to keep a super physiological, so there's creatine in the foods that we eat, the red meat that we consume, but you don't consume enough red meat. Even a carnivore that eats 15 steaks a day, maybe 15 steaks, but most people aren't eating 15 steaks a day. So they're not going to get enough creatine to reach super physiological levels and actually get the benefit of creatine from a training standpoint. So if you're supplementing with it, you can't reach those super physiological levels. 5 grams a day is all you really need. Some people say 3 grams for women, 6 grams for men. Just split the difference. 5 grams a day for everybody, it works fine. There's not really any adverse effect to have more than a saturation point. You'll just excrete it. And honestly, the timing doesn't really matter either, because once you've reached a saturation point with it, it's in your system. So the timing of the dosing doesn't matter.
Now, you need to drink creatine or take creatine on your days off. And should you cycle off of it? These are all questions that I had when I was starting. So I want to like address that because I was, you read too much into it when you care a little too much and you realize it doesn't really matter. So do you need to drink it or take it on your days when you're not working out? And do you need to take like a break from it every couple of months?
So I would drink it even on days you're not working out, simply so that you don't lose that saturation point. Like you want to keep your body saturated with it. So if you take it on days that you don't train, that's totally fine. But if you don't take it on days that you don't train, you may lose that saturation point. You have to kind of rebuild that saturation level back up. As far as cycling it, you don't really need to do that. I feel like in the beginning, a lot of people were associating creatine with like steroids, and you got to cycle steroids. Like, oh, you're on creatine, you're on steroids. Just not the way it works. Like, I mean, you don't really need to cycle creatine. It's just a super simple thing. You just take 5 grams a day and don't worry about it.
I remember there was this one guy who I was acquaintance with at the gym, and he's like, "Do you take any supplements?" Because I had started to lean out a little bit, and I was like, I take creatine, and his like eyeballs popped out of his head. He's like, "Oh, you take creatine?" And I was like, everyone takes creatine at the gym, like
Yeah.
everyone. And he was just like, oh my God, like I could never, like, and I was like, it's not like you're not taking testosterone. Like, so yeah, I feel like a lot of people are a little concerned, like, oh, you don't want to stay on it too long. And I'm like, I mean, it's in me, like it's very
Yeah.
natural.
It's
So
super simple. And I honestly, like, whether I take it or don't, I can't feel a difference. Some
I
people
don't,
can. Yeah. Some
I
people can
don't.
actually feel a difference. I am not one of those people. So I don't doubt that there is a benefit to it, but it's just so minute that I can't tell. But my belief is there's enough studies that they're, illustrating its efficacy that I'm just going to continue to take it. And then my hope is that the compounding effect of those little minuscule differences add up over time.
Yeah, I know some people are like, oh my God, look at my before and after of creatine. And I'm like, I wish I could be a testament to that. But I think it's also great because creatine is one of those supplements where you can get it in its purest form without any of the
Yeah.
fillers. So it's like really, really clean and easy to take. Thank you, because I love talking about supplements too. So
Yeah, for
Well,
sure.
I'm curious on that. Is that something like for just people that are like trying to do the whole bodybuilding thing, or just anyone that's just lifting weights in general, or who should be taking this?
Everybody should take creatine, in my opinion. It's super cheap. I mean, it's literally like the cheapest supplement. There's a lot of companies that try and overmarket it. They'll add a bunch of fillers to it. But a super simple, plain, unflavored creatine monohydrate, 5 grams a day in your water, like it's not going to set you back at all from a price standpoint. Like I said, there's a bunch of recent studies coming out about its benefits from a neurological standpoint. So that alone should be reason for anybody to take it, whether they plan on competing or building, muscle anyways. But there's also a lot of benefit from a muscle preservation standpoint. So I can see how it would be advantageous for people that are aging, people that are not training, people that are injured. I mean, it's just a like a cheap insurance, basically, is a good way to put it. There's not really any adverse effect to taking it, so it might as well be one of the things that you do take. It's kind of like electrolytes. Like people are going to feel better with electrolytes. So just take some creatine with your electrolytes, and there's your daily dose.
Okay, awesome. I'll be digging
I
into that.
you can even put it in your coffee. Like it's like
Yeah.
super like tasteless. It's yeah. So, and I think there's been a couple that I've read about like the benefits specifically for females who are, like with their hormones and stuff like that. Like there's just a lot of benefit for that purpose as well, it seems.
It's kind of
For
funny. There's like this renewed zeal for creatine. So like when I started lifting back in high school, it was like, creatine's like the steroid, bro, you on your creatine. And then there's like it fell out of favor, or not really fell out of favor, but like nobody really talked about it. And now everybody's talking about it all of a sudden. So it's kind of funny how it goes in phases. But there's definitely a lot of studies coming out now because of this renewed excitement around creatine.
Yeah, I just recently heard about it, probably like the last like month or so. Really, it was the first time I've heard of it, and I don't really know much. So thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you have a book and you also created um some pretty cool your keto brick. So can
Mhm.
you just go into a little bit about your book, where people can find it, why you wrote it, what's in there, just general, because we don't want to ruin the surprise, and then talk about what made you develop the keto brick too.
Yeah, so the book, I published the book in January of last year, 2022, and it's basically I wrote the book to basically be a companion guide for anybody that's going through a prep. Like if you are going through a prep and you want to do so via a ketogenic or carnivore approach, you can take that book and run with it, and you don't. I mean, that pretty much covers everything. Like I really tried to go as in depth as possible with that book. It's basically my prep protocol via a ketogenic approach, which is also I consider carnivore a subset of keto. So if you want to go through it with carnivore, all the same principles apply. And that is available at ketogenicbodybuilding.com. And then the keto brick is something that I designed for my own personal prep back in 2017. I never really intended for it to be a product. It was just something that I made to simplify my meal prep and help me hit my macros because there wasn't any products available at that time, especially none that had high quality ingredients. So my girlfriend at the time, wife now, we just rolled up our sleeves and started making these things for our own personal consumption. And then I was documenting my prep on YouTube, and people kept asking about what it is, where they can get it, how much it costs. And I just kind of wrote it off. It's just nothing, just something I'm eating, for my prep. And then I decided to make a product out of it because there was so much demand for it. And her and I just dove into the wonderful world of a food product business. We built this business from the ground up, and We lived in a warehouse for 3 years. I mean, we've been through, we've sacrificed a lot to make this business into what it is now, but it's growing. So that is what it is. It's a 1,000 calorie ketogenic shelf stable meal replacement bar, basically.
Get
Awesome.
those
And
calories in.
yeah, and I'm assuming like a lot of protein and stuff. Like what are the macros or in like a general list of the ingredients?
Yeah, so it just kind of depends on the flavor, but generally speaking, there's actually not a whole lot of protein. Each brick is about 30, 34 grams of protein. Most of the calories coming from the dietary fat, and the primary ingredient and main source of the dietary fat is cacao butter. Cacao butter is the greatest source of stearic acid. A lot of people in the carnivore space are big fans of beef suet for the high stearic acid content. Cacao butter has more stearic acid than beef suet. It's a really well assimilated fat source, doesn't really cause any GI distress, provides a lot of quality energy. So that's the main source of the calories. Then I've got some flavors that use a grass-fed whey protein. I've got some that use the vegetable-based protein for those that have dairy sensitivities, and then just several different flavors depending on what the person's wanting to try.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Okay, I have one last question because I think it's an important thing to talk about, especially when you're talking about bodybuilding, fitness. And then we have, what is it, 3 fun questions that we ask everyone before they leave us. But we had a really, really great conversation with Natalie about eating disorders in the bodybuilding community. And I think from Courtney and I's standpoint, we get accused a lot of, having an eating disorder on a carnivore diet where we don't see it like that. Like I don't fear carbohydrates or anything like that, but there is a lot of disordered eating in the bodybuilding community. Can you just address, maybe you've said you had disordered eating yourself. I think it's just important to leave off on that because a lot of people will listen to things like this and think like, oh, and they get into this and they overanalyze it. And of course, in the bodybuilding community, when you are doing a prep, you have to analyze it. But can you just talk like a little bit about disordered eating and how it is not normal? Prep is not normal life, and how it's really important to remember that food is fuel and we need to nourish our bodies, because I think that that's always important when something with disordered eating comes up.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was plagued with it for years. It pretty much my whole life revolved around food for quite some time. It was a debilitating chapter in my life, so I wouldn't want that for anybody. And it manifests itself differently for different people. For me, I would binge and then I would purge and then I would just have this guilt association with the foods I was consuming. Honestly, for me, with keto, I was eating quality foods. Like there was less guilt associated with eating quality foods. And I feel like that really helped me break free of that disordered eating tendency. And in a prep, you are most certainly tracking everything. You are the epitome of meticulous and disciplined. You're taking everything to the extreme level. So if you know that you are struggling with disordered eating tendencies currently, you may not want to transition into a prep because that may not be a healthy segue for you. But if you have a good relationship with food and you want to go through a prep, then just know that that's a moment in time. Like a lot of people, they get trapped in that mentality of tracking everything and being as meticulous as they need to be for a prep, and they don't break free of it after the prep's over. For me, I think having the reverse diet period and then eating intuitively for a time after that to just simply recognize the fact that you can eat intuitively if you're eating quality foods, and it's going to keep you pretty well, centered. Honestly, for me, simply eating quality foods is so important. Like I feel like a lot of people, I feel like a lot of disordered eating tendencies, especially within the bodybuilding space, happen because people eat crappy food the majority of their time. Then they get everything super strict and dialed in for a prep. They feel like they sacrifice a ton, and then when the prep's over and there's no longer any finish line looming ahead of them, they let everything go off kilter and they, binge on everything in sight. And I feel like if you can just simply adopt a lifestyle around food that you don't feel like you have to sacrifice and deviate from, then you can titrate the calories up and down depending on your fitness and bodybuilding goals, but you'll always remain close to that solid center. So for me, that's the message that I've been trying to share.
I have to ask you, when you're done with the show, the most popular thing is to show what you eat after you get off stage. What are you eating?
I typically just keep it simple. I eat a ribeye steak. Sometimes my wife will make like this keto brownie, which is pretty much just eggs. It's made with eggs, like the main ingredient's eggs. Um, and that's pretty much all I need right there.
I know you see the people like they're shoving the cookie down their throat or a piece of pizza like in their bikinis still. So I had to ask what
Yeah,
you
see
ate.
that to me is like that's more of a form of disordered eating than
Right,
what
right,
we're
right.
doing. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. That's always been my thought. And it's really ironic to be like, um, you cut carbs out or because they just don't make you feel good. And everyone's like, well, you have disordered eating, but there's the same, people who are like, oh, I'm gonna go and eat whatever I want on a Saturday and Sunday and they binge, but they don't recognize it as binge eating. And so, or the community where like it's like, oh, I eat so healthy to get so muscular, but I step off the platform and I am eating a giant New York slice of pizza and it's
yeah.
actually like glorified. So
I like the fact that my food choices don't change at all between when I'm in a competition prep and when I'm in my day-to-day life. Like it's literally the same foods, just in different quantities.
yeah, I love
That makes
that.
it like just keep it simple. Like that seems like the best way to go. Why complicate things?
100%.
Um, okay, so before you want to do the question, Seven, you just want to tell everyone like where they can find you on socials and I'm curious, do you work with people online or are you only doing like in-person coaching?
So I do the opposite of that. I only do online and not in-person coaching. But yeah,
Perfect.
all of that's like my coaching is on ketosavage.com. It's where I also host my podcast. Most of my content is there. Keto Savage on Instagram, YouTube. Uh, Keto Savage is pretty much my primary content brand. Ketobrick.com for the bricks. And then I did build out a separate website for the book. So ketogenicbodybuilding.com for that, but it's also available on Amazon.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Devin, you want to do the questions?
Okay, so we have three fun questions that we always ask someone. Number one, we're going to start with my favorite one. What is your favorite curse word?
My favorite curse word. I gotta say it now too, right? Like I gotta cuss on
You
camera
don't
here.
have to. We've had people who are like, Courtney's like, yeah, say it. We've had people say like the form, the indirect form.
I don't even know if I have a favorite cuss word.
You just like them all.
Yeah, there you
Or
go.
you don't cuss? Do you
I,
have like you don't have a potty mouth?
I don't cuss. Well, it depends who you ask. My wife probably says I cuss a lot. I don't feel like I cuss a lot. We also have a newborn, so I'm trying not to cuss even less so now. Um, Honestly, probably just like damn or shit or something super simple like that. Nothing
Oh,
drastic.
you're like the only one who said that. Everyone like it was like overwhelmingly everyone has said the F word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, damn.
You stick out. There you go. Number two, before you were like in the keto space, what was your favorite junk food?
Favorite junk food. These are some hard questions. Junk food. I didn't like it, but I'll tell you what I ate a lot of. When I was trying to bulk up, when I initially got up to 230 pounds trying to build muscle, I was eating those 800 calorie macho chimichangas that you'd buy at the gas station. Totally disgusting.
That is so gross.
Yeah, like you stick them in the microwave for 3.5 minutes. It's gross. But I'd eat whatever I needed to eat to get bigger at that time in my life. So not favorite at all, but that's something that I like look back at and I'm not proud of.
It was a
Sounds funny.
staple.
Yeah.
And then the third one, this is easier. What are you currently reading or watching?
Okay, so I am currently reading. This may sound a little self-absorbed, but I'm actually reading my book, not because I'm trying to read my book because I love my book so much, because I'm actually building it out into a course. So I'm reading a chapter and then filming a course module the following day. So I'm kind of rereading my own book for the course production standpoint. But I'm also reading. What else am I reading? I actually just got a book from Bill Schindler. He sent me a book, and it is Modern Stone Age Human, I believe is the name. I've got my bookshelf over there. So I'm reading his book.
We just had him on. He just was on last week's podcast, right?
Bill
Yeah,
Schindler
it
is
was out.
awesome.
Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I took him and his son Billy down to my farm a couple weeks
Oh,
ago to hunt.
yes.
Yeah, he's
That
an
was you.
awesome guy. Yeah,
Okay,
he's
I'm remembering because there was like quite a few of you guys that are like
yeah,
big names, if you will, in this space. And yes, I'm remembering I saw him post that.
yeah,
So
he's an awesome dude.
So and you don't have to say because this is like private, but you're East Coast too.
I'm in Arkansas, so I'm right in the center.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because we were talking, he's in Maryland. Well,
Hmm.
he like has to tell people where he is because that's like where his business is. But we're in Virginia, and you guys, if you were with him, drove through where I live because I live in the middle of nowhere now.
Yeah.
And we were talking because he was like, oh, since you're close, you'll have to come to the Stone Age kitchen and stuff. And I was like, oh, well, this is where we live. And he's like, yeah, you do live in the middle of nowhere. We drove right through there. So he told us
Yeah.
all about that last week.
Awesome. Yeah, he's top flight. He's a great guy.
Yeah, we couldn't cut the conversation off because it was too good. So, well, thank you so much for everything. We will put all your links down below. But yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah, thank you all so much for the opportunity. A pleasure chatting with y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, we will catch you next time, guys.